Welcome to ChiroSphere, where we talk about all things chiropractic and some things not so chiropractic. I'm Dr. Ray Foxworth, your host for ChiroSphere and CEO of ChiroHealth USA, the network that works for chiropractic. Our guest today has spent over 30 years advancing chiropractic care, from practicing clinician to leading the profession's top accrediting body. Dr. Craig Little is the president and CEO of the Council on Chiropractic Education, is a board-certified chiropractic orthopedist, educator, and recognized leader in state and national organizations. He has helped shape quality standards, guide accreditation practices, and influence healthcare policy at the national level. Dr. Little has spoken internationally on accreditation and competency, conducted research on how programs implement change, and continues to drive innovation in chiropractic education. Today, he'll share his insights on the current state of the profession, evolving education standards, and what the future holds for chiropractic. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Dr. Foxworth. I appreciate being able to spend a little time with you today.
You bet. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I shared with Dr. Short that we had on yesterday that an unexpected pleasure of doing these podcasts. I didn't initially want to do them, but I run into guys like you and Dr. Short, and you get maybe what I'll call a drive-by conversation, because we're always busy going from one meeting to another, and we don't ever really get a chance to go deeper. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So you spent over 30 years as a practicing chiropractor before leading the Council on Chiropractic Education. How did that happen?
In a roundabout way, I was a practitioner and did a lot of research on the work value of chiropractic. I partnered with Dr. Christine Gertz when we studied the actual work that a chiropractor does. And this was in addition to my private practice. So I was involved in the California Association and in a national association and trying to define the actual work that chiropractors do and putting a value to that. So in doing that work, it was a lot of research, and it was really, trying to justify the physician level work that chiropractors do. So education was a big part of that. And essentially at the time, I was appointed to the Council on Chiropractic Education, and I really didn't even know how to spell the word accreditation. So the way it was is they had practitioners. I was a practitioner, and I had some research work that I was doing. So I ended up getting appointed to that body. And as a practitioner, and I ended up serving on evaluating site teams, looking at programs, making change in the organization, because we were a very different organization back in the 1990s to where we are today. So it ended up by being a simple site team member, eventually joining the decision-making body, eventually becoming a board member, chair of the organization. And essentially doing that work really led me to the point where when they were needing a new CEO, I had been doing a lot of that work, and it really interested me. So I love the 35 years that I had as a practitioner. I love treating patients. Dealing with an insurance companies, not so much. I'd had enough of that. And,
Yeah.
it was really an interest and a passion. Higher ed in chiropractic became a passion. And so I went and obtained a master's degree in education and eventually a doctoral degree in education, because I really believe that chiropractic education is important. It's what helps leads us to really forward as a profession. So I think there's tremendous opportunity. I think there's tremendous risk out there right now when it comes to education. I'm sure we can talk about that more. But it was an inadvertent step as a volunteer that led me to accreditation.
So the work you were doing on the work value, for those that may not understand how that whole world works, the reason you get paid, doctors, what you get paid is part of the what is it, the RVU
Yes,
system,
exactly.
which is the
Right.
relative value of the work. And I know we always talk about trying to achieve parity in reimbursement. And while I think we can to a certain extent, there can be variations in that. Even though a neurosurgeon may use a 99204 or 205, we may bill that. But when you when you factor in the work value plus the cost of him running that business, if his malpractice is 5 or 10 times higher than mine, which they are at a minimum, then their reimbursement value is going to be up. But there's a big disparity in where we are now, and that certainly we need to close that gap. But because of office expense, malpractice, the cost of running a neurosurgical suite versus you running a chiropractic practice, that's always going to be a factor in there. And while we'd love to see them the same, they're just not going to be. And so the best next thing we can do is understand why. So we don't feel like we're being picked on like the redheaded stepchild we think we are most of the time. So
Agreed.
you also serve as the board president of ASPA, which is the Association of Specialized and Professional Accreditors. What are some of the biggest shifts happening right now in overall just in higher education and particularly in healthcare degree programs?
Certainly. As chair of that body, that is essentially an association of accrediting agencies. So there's about 75 different accreditors in the U.S. Most of them represent disciplines: medicine, osteopathic medicine, podiatry, all the healthcare fields, but going also from the beginning, midwifery, to the end, funeral service. So every discipline and every profession has an accrediting body. And essentially, I'm chairman of the board of that particular body that represents all accreditors. And we're up against a very difficult time right now. The political pendulum, I've been in accreditation long enough that I've been through several administrations. So I've ridden this pendulum back and forth between, the Bush, between Bush 1, Bush 2, between Obama, between Biden, between Trump 1, between Trump 2. And every time we have this influence of the executive branch of government, it puts a different challenge on those that are involved in higher education. And right now, it's an extremely challenging time, not just for chiropractic, but for every, especially healthcare profession. As you know, there was this omnibus bill called the Big Beautiful Bill. And essentially what came about was an extensive reform on how students can borrow money that is guaranteed by the federal government for their education. It wiped out all but a few disciplines that are professional in nature, and thankfully chiropractic is professional in nature. Most graduate education is capped now at $100,000 being able to borrow for that. So professions like nursing, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all these disciplines can only borrow up to that amount for their loans. Now, thankfully, chiropractic is up to a $200,000 limit. With that, because we are defined as a professional discipline along with medicine, osteopathic medicine, podiatric medicine, dentistry, so a few others. And that's a challenge because it is very expensive higher education is very expensive, and a $100,000 limit would absolutely kill the profession. $200 cap on professional degree programs with a $257,000 lifetime limit. What that means is if you come with a bachelor's degree and you spend $100,000 as a student getting a bachelor's degree, which is not unheard of, it's probably close to the median. You only have a cap of $257,000. We know that most students right now going through chiropractic educational programs are getting debt somewhere in the range of around $250,000, $280,000, somewhere in that range. It's expensive because you have to go and you have to live outside of the home. Currently, you have to go live in an area that's usually pretty expensive, either like an urban area. You have to live for 3 to 4 years. You have to pay tuition for 3 to 4 years, and you have all this debt that rides up, and then you have to get out and you have to be successful enough to pay those loans back. That's what the government wants. So right now they're putting an immense stress on what a student can borrow under federal guaranteed payment systems. And what's going to happen is we really don't know. Is the private lending system going to come up, and what are students going to have to do to get private loans? Can we make our educational programs more affordable, which is really what we want to do? But there are a lot of obstacles to change on how chiropractic educational programs can innovate. And we can talk about that more as well. But the main stress that's happening right now, Ray, is that there's almost it's we're at a crossroads. There's so much opportunity out there for the chiropractic profession that there's also existential threats in not being able to produce enough graduates to fulfill the need of folks retiring, let alone grow the profession. So right now, it's almost mutually exclusive. The amount of opportunity versus the amount of risk are astronomically high.
Yeah, we were talking before we went live on this that I don't think there's ever been a better, and I've said this for decades, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a chiropractor, but there's probably never been a worse time to be in chiropractic as a profession or as a school. And I'd shared with you a couple of years back, I did a presentation and I had a slide from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it showed that chiropractic would be or should be in the like top 10% of growing professions in the United States based on the demand that's occurring. People wanting less opioids, people wanting more of a choice than a pill or a surgery. And the the disconnect is higher demand and not enough students coming in. And the company we run, I mean, we've been at this 18 years. I can't tell you how many practices are just closing. They're not selling like they used to, because a kid's coming out of school with $250,000 debt. What are they going to buy your practice with? I mean, they're already kind of upside down, unfortunately, the difference in reimbursements in chiropractic and medicine and other disciplines and the artificial barriers to care, like, the pre-cert playing Mother May I with the gatekeeper, higher deductibles if you see a chiropractor, higher copays if you go the chiropractic route. And so it's interesting to see that the public demand is there. We've just got to figure out how to get through this next phase and get things, I guess, kind of normalize. What are you hearing, if anything? Uh, how something's got to give somewhere. What are you hearing that the colleges might be able to do, or what are they considering doing that's going to be different that might be able to lower some of that tuition?
Well, first of all, there's enormous stress that all of our programs are going to be under because there's a new formula that's coming out of with regulatory change out of the Department of Education. So right now they're looking at formulas that for an institution that has like a chiropractic program, for them to be able to get federal funds, Title IV money, they have to show a positive return on investment. And the way that they do that is that they have to look at the graduates of chiropractic programs and what their IRS return is on how much money they're making and compare that against a nationalized norm for a baccalaureate level education to determine, so they have a metric to determine whether the value of that education is significantly meaningful in that graduate's life. That is very challenging for chiropractic because, as you know, still the vast number of folks that graduate from chiropractic programs, it's entrepreneurial in nature. 70% or more still go out and either hang a shingle or go into a practice with another chiropractor. And what they're showing as far as their income there's usually a pretty big latent effect because, you're paying for so much, you're not really showing a profit early on. It takes some time to do that. We have the research that we know it takes a significant time for a private practitioner, entrepreneurial type practice to really become profitable to where that person's taking and showing that where that education's paid off. However, what the government's looking at is they're looking at the first few years and they want to say they're getting IRS data on what your graduates are making and comparing it against that. So right now, what we're seeing is probably we've run these numbers on some programs. Programs have seen the numbers. Probably about at least 6 of our programs right now wouldn't make that threshold and would be at risk for losing federal financial aid. They'll give you a year. If it doesn't meet it in 1 year, they'll give you another year. But if it's 3 years non-successful, you lose Title IV money. And what that means is an immediate existential threat to that program. And we have at least 6 programs that are at risk of that. What makes it even more complex is that so much has changed right now in higher education. We have an enrollment cliff. There was not a lot of babies born after 2008 because of the economic collapse in our economy. People stopped having babies right there because, the birth rate went down. Also, we have a lot of healthcare programs competing for the best students. And right now, if you're looking at chiropractic as a profession, you're comparing it against other professions. We're always going to have the legacy chiropractic student. We're always going to have the chiropractic student that has had that experience. Is why I became a chiropractor, is that I went in with a torticollis, was treated by a blind chiropractor. How's this guy going to know what he's doing, and how does he know what I have? And I walked out, with my head facing east and west. And I walked in with it facing east and west, and I walked out facing north and south. And I had that experience that said, that was at least close to magic, if not magic, and that's what I want to do for a living. So we'll always have those students, but Ray, that's not enough to fill the need of the profession. We need to be able to compete against other healthcare disciplines for the best students, and what that means is we have to be an attractive offering. To go to chiropractic school, you have to spend 3 to 4 years right now, in addition to at least 90 units or a bachelor's degree. That's a long period of time of higher education. That's why that's the debt problem. So in order for programs to innovate, they have to be able to have look at the program length, and they have to have the number of hours that's commensurate with a good education, and at the same time trying to keep that student expense down.
Yeah. When you talk about the criteria for school to continue to get that money, it seems like we're getting a double whammy. I mean, they're lowering the overall amount that's being loaned, and you know, good thing or bad thing depends on whether you're running the college or you're a student. Um, and they're also tying us to that first 2 or 3 years. I have never made less money as a human being in my first couple of years of practice. So while that may sound good on paper as a good criteria to follow, the reality is it does take several years to show that kind of profitability. Are they looking at the doctor's gross income or their net income? Because we also know the role that taxes play, and some people are more creative than others. And um, so that while that may be their formula, it doesn't sound like it's very practical. Uh,
It does not align well because essentially they're looking at what would be comparable to like a W-2, you know, a line item for a salary. So they're going to look at that net income
yeah.
line, and that's a challenge. And that's why the Bureau of Labor Statistics is so skewed. The Bureau of Labor Statistics only gets true employee data, and so it really looks low for the chiropractic profession. It's actually it's higher, but there's some lag time when you're setting up your own business. And we're still looking at, most surveys show us that 70% of students are going out and following this entrepreneurial path and setting up their own practice. Employment opportunities are expanding for chiropractic. We need it, to expand even at a faster rate.
So I think, at a summit meeting when you spoke to us about the challenges with the state laws and how many hours they require. I recall something along the lines of, well, California did this and now everybody's doing that, and we tied it to some 5,500. You know the number, I don't.
Sure.
Um, but and those are hours that require butts in seats. Well, guess what? Time has changed, my friend. And the reality is, whether it's med school, nursing school, there is so much of it that is learned online or remotely. Certainly, there are aspects of those professions and of ours that will always have to be in person. What do you see technology? What impact do you see technology having, and how big of a problem is that? That there are correct me if I'm wrong, but there are students that could be graduating from a program today that maybe have morphed their delivery of classes to remote like we did during COVID. And now they can't go practice in this state or this state because they've got that 5,000 hour butts in seat rule.
Yeah, it's pretty onerous. I mean, we have, and the problem is that if you look at other healthcare disciplines, and I'm talking every other, I'm talking MD, DO, dentistry, podiatric medicine, every healthcare discipline, in order to get a license in a state, you have to do two things. You have to, first of all, graduate from an accredited program, period, and also pass a national exam for licensure. Now, for chiropractic, it's much different. We have states that say you have to have you have to graduate from an accredited college, but then it goes on and on. They say but you also have to have so many hours in bacteriology, so many hours in microbiology, so many hours in physiology. I mean, they're still out there with a number of hours, and that students have to be exposed and for treating syphilis, which isn't even around anymore, but it's because these practice acts date back to the 1940s and 50s. And there's requirements for 4,500 or more 60-minute classroom hours, butt in the seat. So schools have to teach to the highest level of requirement because they want their students to be able to practice anywhere in the US. So no matter what the accreditor says, you have to meet that. Well, it's becoming increasingly problematic because that prevents programs from innovating and competing with other disciplines. It's like I say, it's not a lot of states, Ray. I mean, we can probably count them on two hands. It's probably a dozen or less, but they have to change. And if they don't change, the chiropractic higher education profession can't change. And if the higher education profession can't change, we can't compete in getting the best students. We also can't fulfill the need of the amount of graduates that are needed for the chiropractors that are retiring, and we cannot grow the profession. And Ray, you were in practice and still are probably to some degree. If you're not, or as a business, if you're not growing, you're dying. You know what? That
Fact.
is that's a fact of life that you learn early on. So you're either growing or you're dying. And so I always link this back to a paradigm between Blockbuster and Netflix. Blockbuster would not change. They always believed that people would come into their stores, rent their stuff, and walk out and come back. And Netflix said, "Oh, no, we're going to mail them to you." And they started doing that up until the point in time that the internet came about. Then they were able to have the streaming, and you didn't have to leave your house anymore. That essentially was the kiss of death for Blockbuster.
Evolve
This
or
is
die.
this is the same existential threat. If we can't allow our programs to deliver high quality education, like you and I are doing right now, in a either synchronous or asynchronous manner, that's much more expensive for a student. If we require our students to do 4 years with their butt in a seat, but medicine now, the medicine programs are no longer 4-year programs. They're all 3 years or less. You can become an osteopath right out of high school. Go to an osteopathic college, and they'll give you a combined bachelor degree and a DO degree in about 5 years. If you're going to compete with that, you have to be able to deliver a portion of your curriculum and however the student wants to take it at the least expense, which is distance education. As an accreditor, CCE is changing their scope to allow that. We're actually going through the Department of Education recognition saying, we can certify this, we can verify the educational quality for the distance education provided by chiropractic programs. we're set to do it, but the states still are requiring um, his chiropractic students to have their butts in the seat for so many hours. So it's a dilemma.
Yeah, when you're dealing with states and regulations, I will tell you from running our company, we're licensed or approved to do business by a Department of Insurance in all the states with the exception of Washington. And I will tell you, there is nothing united about the United States as
Yes.
far as the rules and regulations. I mean, what the things we have to do in one state, they literally treat us like a third party administrator, though we aren't involved in claims processing, utilization review, or anything that goes along with that. But that's the category we fall in. You go to another state and it's a one-page form you fill out. It literally is kind of all over the board. Well, Craig, do you think that there is when we look in years past and now, I've heard that not just chiropractic, but all of healthcare is seeing a decline in interest of people going into the professions. And again, you hear about the medical doctors being burnt out and the nurses being burnt out and hospital is, right on down the line. The reality is we have a pretty damn good lifestyle as chiropractors. I've, never had a patient die on me, never had one bleed out on me. We don't see the same types of cases. And at the end of the day, you can make a great living. You can have a great retirement, but you got to know some business stuff to be able to do that. Um, but do you see a continuing demand for chiropractic education, or is it in decline? When do you think it might bottom out if it does?
Mm. I think you asked me about 5 questions there, so
I did.
I'm gonna try
Yeah,
to go one
I am
step.
not a fan of punctuation, so I
All
just
right. I'm
yeah,
gonna
I
start
speak
out
and run on sentences.
with the first part of your question. Generally, throughout all of healthcare, there's been a decline, and it's been happening about over the last 5 years. So medicine's down in their total enrollment about 5%. Um, Occupational therapy is down about 33%. Huge decline. We'll talk more about why that on that later. PT is down probably around 5% to 6%. And overall chiropractic over the last 5 years is down about 7%. Okay. And the interesting part to that I still don't have a great handle on is of that 7%, the vast majority are women in chiropractic. We are seeing about an 11% total decrease over the last 5 years of women compared to men. And that's interesting to me because prior to that, the 5 years to 10 years prior to that, the amount of women, um, applying, matriculating, and completing chiropractic educational programs was climbing at an astronomical rate. The why behind that, I think someone should study that. I think it's interesting, but it's complex. But we're seeing that, but again, everyone's facing something that is of a higher degree right now, because what I talked about, what happened in 2008 and the birth rate going down, that's just really hitting right now. The kids going to college or going to graduate school. Also, the economic forces and the public perception is not real good right now when it comes to higher ed. When you can go out and you can learn to code, off of YouTube or go to, some certificate program, and you can come out or you can go into a trade and make $100 to $120,000 a year. The value that's associated with higher ed is down right now. So when you're looking at that birth rate decline plus the public's perception plus return on investment, high amount of cost, um, we haven't I believe that our challenge is still before us. I think that we need to take aggressive steps, to allow chiropractic programs to innovate. They know how to make good practitioners. I think our students are coming out farly better prepared now than when you and I, had our educational experience. What they do, I think we're producing a far safer graduate. We have technology now, if you're educating a pilot, you use a simulator, right? Well, we have
Mhm.
simulators in all our chiropractic programs right now by way of a product called a force sensing technology, and these students actually compete with each other on the depth and the vector and the quality of their adjustment, and we're able to see it in real time, and they're able to measure it in real time. They get instant feedback. We've got so many great things going on. There's never a better time to become a chiropractor. We have the demand. I think you make the lifestyle argument that I always make. I loved being a chiropractor, and it was because of the lifestyle associated with it. You're not, you make the hours that are right for you, and you're able to do that. You can have a family. If you have you end up having a child, it's something that you can work back and forth with. We find people that do it. My children were raised in a spare room of my chiropractic office, because there was, I mean, and we had these little gates going by. So when patients walked to the treatment room that they were going to go, they always stopped by and saw the kids until they were of age to be able to go to preschool or to kindergarten. You can't do that in a lot of settings. Okay. So, and I think that there's still a perception value to that that's huge.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many adjustments I gave with my daughter under my desk in
Yeah.
the same room because I had my treatment table in my, office, and I mean, that was just the way that we did it. I
Yeah.
mean, that truly is a family practice.
That's right.
All right, everybody, hang tight while we take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Welcome back to our podcast with Dr. Craig Little. I'm enjoying the conversation, Craig. This is the part about going deeper and learning more about what everybody's doing that is really enjoyable. So, what excites you most about the next generation of chiropractors entering the profession? What are you seeing as far as any changes in the quality, caliber, focus of new students coming in?
We have an exception. The best part of my job is really going to, like, the Association of Chiropractic Colleges meetings, seeing students, going on site to educational programs, meeting with them. We have a great group. We're still attracting great students out there. I see a lot of potential. It always fascinates me on, how I watch, and I've been watching especially some students that are family of friends of mine that are, they're on their probably third or fourth generation of a chiropractic family, and seeing how they make the transition and how they're using social media very effectively to build their practice. Things that you and I would have never, you know, thought
Didn't
of.
exist.
It didn't exist. And, to a degree, I'm kind of glad because I don't know if I'd be any good at it, but they're finding their way. They're pretty good at it. Mine was always through service. I found that the more I served my community, the more I became known. So I'm seeing some of this through social media as well and how they can use it effectively. I see it used horribly by some, but it's used very thoughtfully by others. And so the innovation is really there and how you're able to market and connect with people. So I see them being able to do that to far greater degrees than I would have ever been able to do. Very proud that students come out knowing having a little bit better base of appreciation for research because there's so much more that supports our profession today, Ray, than you and I ever had. There was no support for the adjustment when I was arguing for work values for chiropractic. It wasn't there. We didn't have the research on manipulation or adjustment. We didn't have any of the low back pain studies, neck pain, or other studies to support what we did. Now we have that. And so here we were almost, we're really not alternative anymore in most folks' light. We're very well supported for what we do by way of literature. So I think it's important that our students have more of appreciation for that than we probably did. I don't know what your research education was. Mine was pretty shoddy. Um, we do a good job of that now.
I did my paper on the trabecular pattern of Riha's monkeys. That was extended, and I can't tell you how much that has helped me throughout the years, and I say that jokingly, but it really was an interesting thing that I learned because the trabecular pattern on those monkeys is so dense compared to humans, and it's because of motion and movement and those positive stresses that make them look different because they function different than we. So yeah, that was my research. I didn't publish any papers or anything on it, but if you ever see a rhesus monkey, you know their trabecular pattern is
That's
distinctly different than a human.
You know what? When it comes to research, the most important thing in my view is it helps teach you how to think. There's so much that goes on in chiropractic, and there's so many. Ray, when you look at social media, you see some groups claim certain things. You can't just, we're exposed to so much information, misinformation, disinformation. That's what I think complicates our profession right now. And so I think the work that you're doing and a lot of people doing, when you come down to a podcast is really talk about, what's real and going on. And let's talk about what's real in higher education. What's real about a challenge in getting a license to practice. There's so much that goes on out there that I see, off of Facebook and other platforms that people are just making stuff up as they go. And we don't have the time of an agency to go out and correct all of that. So I think one of the bigger challenges in our profession is when we can really, spend the time to be thoughtful about, analyzing information and what is there to really support it when there comes to claims of, success or complaints of a certain agency's failing to do something, looking at that work.
Yeah. So, what changes do you see in education today that will hopefully make us stronger in 10 to 20 years, or what changes do you think need to be made over the next 5 to 10 years even to where we're in a stronger position? So, you're king for the day. What's your you're going to wave your magic wand, and what's going to be different?
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut regulation. I'm gonna allow programs to be I would allow programs to be responsible for 2 things: making sure that you can produce a competent chiropractor, and the evidence that we need are best practices in assessing how you determine that. What tools do you use? How do you measure it? How do you know it's validity and reliability? You prove me that. I don't care what you do at the front end of the program. I don't care how many hours of bacteriology, how many hours of histology. I want to know, can you produce a
Or
chiropractor
competencies?
that
Yeah.
is competent? And I don't care how many hours it takes you to do that, because some are going to move faster than others. We just know that. But right now, it's a common requirement. No matter how bright you are, and no matter how special you are, you're still got to keep your butt in the seat for 4,500 hours. Do you know what research is out there that says 4,500 hours of your butt in the seat makes you a competent chiropractor? Zero. All right. What we know,
Boy,
what
that's a
makes
lot.
yeah, zero, zero. But that's a failed paradigm. That's the way we used to know that something was effective, is that if you spend enough time there, or if you did 250 adjustments, we knew you were competent. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, I agree. And when you look at how do I want to pose this, students do learn at a different rate, and making everybody go down the same path has never really made a lot of sense to me. I mean, there are some people who get it quick and some people who take a little bit longer. And it is, but the reason I think that are seeing X number of hours as the criteria is, for those of you that have been involved in legislative issues over the years, it's kind of like, well, we're going to pass this law in Mississippi, and the first thing the legislators ask, like it has any relevance at all, is, well, what do they do in Louisiana? What do they do in Tennessee? Or what do they do in Georgia? And then we kind of adopt what they do, not because it was the right thing to do, but because we did R&D. We ripped off and duplicated their laws, and if the MDs had to have 4,500, by God, we're going to have 5,000 hours.
Right.
So it was almost like uh, in some ways an attempt to assure the public or assure ourselves that our education is just as good as anybody else because we've spent all these hours. And the reality is, I don't think there's a direct correlation between competency and the number of hours your butt is in a seat.
When I we talked about states and the different challenges, when I talk to different states that have these onerous requirements, there's like three factors that they go through that they don't want to change it. One of it's fear that if I open this up, someone's going to come in whenever I open it up and they're going to try to change my profession, which I don't think there's any evidence for that, but that's a fear. The second is they try to use it as a chit for keeping other professions from being able to practice manipulation/adjustment.
Hmm.
To prevent the PTs from being able to do this service. So if we have this 4,500 hour requirement, that'll prevent the PTs from coming in and taking part of our scope.
Yeah.
I think that that's short-sighted, because you're going to let a profession die over trying to save some competition. And the third is, um, really, it's unfortunate. There are still states out there that want to practice professional birth control.
Say that again.
There are still those out there that don't that want to control professional birth control. They don't necessarily, they're not interested in doing it. There's already too many chiropractors. I
Yeah.
hear that. I That shocked me when I heard that. When I heard basically the right, and I put the terminology
You're right.
birth control. I said that's what you're trying to do, but you know what? There's a lot of people that you know that affects very onerously. But those are the
Oh,
three factors.
yeah, I remember when I got my license here in Mississippi, as I said, my mom and dad were both chiropractors. And there at a point in time, there was, well, who do you know or who's your mom and them?
Right.
Or there were states like, you couldn't go directly into practice. You had to work for another chiropractor. I mean, I think they used to call those indentured servants.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, to some degree, that it might not be communicated well, but I try to find how can we make a change in a state, and part of it is it's just keeping your head in the sand too. There are some states that say we'll never enforce it. We'll just never enforce it. Well, what's going to happen is what happened in the state of Florida. They had something on their books that you had to have a bachelor's degree from an accredited U.S. program before you entered chiropractic school, but we'll never enforce it. Well, they got a new attorney that came in on the board that said, "Hey, you have this requirement here. Why aren't you enforcing it?" "Well, we never enforce it." "You have to
That's-
enforce it. You have
yeah.
to." And so what happened was
Shall, not a may.
you had hundreds of chiropractors that were no longer going to be eligible to practice in Florida. And so it took, really a chiropractic association along with a chiropractic college or two to change the legislation. So when I hear that from folks, I just always point them to what happened in Florida. You can't have that. It'll affect you down the road.
No doubt. Well, we're going to wrap things up with a few fun questions.
Okay.
So, who's your hero and why?
Oh, my hero I have several. I'm sorry, I can't just give you one. My first hero is my mentor, a gentleman by the name of Willard Smith, who was a chiropractor in California, that after my father passed, he became very close. My second is a gentleman by the name of George McAndrews. When I was appointed to the American Medical Association um, CPT committee, I was in there immediately following the success of the Wilk lawsuit. And when I went in there, I was kicked out of my first meeting. I'm serious, literally kicked out because I was a chiropractor. And you have no right to be here, even though we had this Wilk suit. So I got out and I called, and eventually I called Mike Pedigo, who's a very close friend of mine, and he got me on the phone with George McAndrews. And you know what? I guess there was one phone call from George McAndrews to the AMA attorney, and I was actually seated the next day. That was
Highly effective.
that was highly effective. So those folks were by far uh, my most important memories.
Yeah. That that decision so impacted my practice, just unbelievable at the time when that occurred. But Doesn't mean it's that professional discrimination still doesn't go on in certain pockets. I mean, it does, no doubt about it. But things have definitely improved over the years, though. And I have to tell you, kudos for you said you were chairman of this accreditation group.
Yes. Not a good
So
not a good time to be chairman. I
no,
should
I'm sure it's
give it
not.
another year.
But my reason for bringing that up is here's a chiropractor. You got your degrees in education, and you have risen to the top of that organization, which means that they have respect for you. They have respect for your profession. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I want to encourage other chiropractors to get involved outside of their office and just show up. I
Yes,
mean, get involved, show up, be in the meetings, and you know that's really how we become. I don't want to use the term integrated because some people have a negative connotation with that, but the reality is we need to play well with others.
exactly.
And we can sit over here and bash the medics or bash this group or that group, or we can figure out where's some commonality. They can't help all the patients they see with neuromusculoskeletal problems. They could use a good chiropractor on their team, and vice versa. I can't help every patient that comes in my office, but when I can't, my next obligation is to make sure that they're seeing somebody that I would go see. It is. Um, I just think that's critical. I got another question for you. What talent do you have that most people don't know about?
Oh, well, I don't think anyone knows about it, but I spent a lot of time, we've spent a lot of time as my family competing in a sport that's gone 3 generations. Um, I've participated in automobile racing, growing up. Competitively, semi-professionally. My son also, and we'll have another generation as well. So that involvement and being able to compete, it taught me a lot. It taught me about work. It taught me a lot about preparation. And the harder you work before an event, the more successful you're going to be. So that's something I don't think anybody knows, but it's been my family's passion for some time.
So what kind of car are you? Dirt track? You
Dirt track sprint car, yeah, the meanest and the nastiest.
well, I at almost 70 years old, I attended my first Talladega race, and I
Oh,
had no idea I was a NASCAR fan.
yep.
It was a blast, just an unbelievable experience. One
Yeah.
final one. What's the worst job you ever had?
The worst job I ever had, I've really never had a bad job. But I will say, if I had to choose one, in college, I worked for a pharmaceutical wholesaler and I delivered medications to different pharmacies all over and interacted with folks in that discipline. And I delivered large bottles of pharmaceutical grade cocaine. That taught me that the amount of how over medicated our population is. Growing up in a pharmacy and having a father that's a pharmacist that didn't believe in the amount of medications that people were buying, he was the first. In 1960, my father built a little commercial center, and he rented space to a chiropractor. This was 1960. This was not acceptable by the medical community. But that was his faith and belief and the ability for chiropractic. I don't know exactly where it came, but he would often to his customers say, "Hey, you ever thought about trying the chiropractor next door? You're not getting anywhere with what you're taking." So that was the best job, being able to see that early on. The best job I had was actually being a practitioner, being able to treat patients. That was it. But what led up to it was pretty special as well.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to wrap this up. Doctors, if you're offering discounts, make sure you're not violating state or federal rules on dual fee schedules, inducements, or anti kickback laws. The fines are serious. Our profitable discount strategy keeps your discounts fully compliant and, most importantly, profitable. It starts with a free, no obligation call to see if we can help you, just like we've helped thousands of other doctors nationwide. Many have seen a 20% increase in revenue and a 50% patient retention of patients within our network. For over 18 years, over 7,000 chiropractors have helped 4.3 million patient family members get affordable care through ChiroHealth USA. If you want more revenue, better retention, and peace of mind, call 888-719-9990 or visit CHUSA.com. That's CHUSA.com to see why ChiroHealth USA is the network that works for chiropractic and you. Make it a great day, everybody. Thanks so much, Craig. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.